Chapter 19. Ever the knightly years were gone with the old world to the grave. I was a king in Babylon and you were a Christian slave. I saw, I took, I cast you by, I bent and broke your pride. And a myriad suns have set and shone since then upon the grave decreed by the king in Babylon to her that had been his slave. The pride I trampled is now my scathe, for it tramples me again. The old resentment lasts like death, for you love, yet you refrain. I break my heart on your hard and fat, and I break my heart in vain. William Ernest Henley. Elizabeth was frustrated and despondent. Her new relationship had lasted for only 2 dates. Bob was avoiding her. She had known him casually for more than a year, through work. He was successful and handsome and shared many of her interests. He told her that his long-term affair with a married woman had just ended. Bob had had several short-term relationships with other women, but there always seemed to be something lacking in these women. According to him, they would turn out to be superficial or unintelligent or not share his values, and he would end the relationships. His married lover would always accept him back. Her husband was rich, but their relationship lacked passion. She would not leave her husband in their affluent life. You're different from the others, Bob swore to Elizabeth. We have so much more in common. He told Elizabeth that she was more intelligent than any of the others, more beautiful, that he knew their relationship could last. Elizabeth convinced herself that Bob was right. He was there all the time, and I never really noticed, she thought. Sometimes the answer is right in front of your eyes and you never see it. She forgot that the reason she never really noticed Bob and his blonde good looks was that she never felt a chemistry with him. She was lonely and desperate for a man's arms. She listened to her head and ignored her heart's warning. Their first date was very promising. They went out for a casual dinner, a good movie, and intimate conversation while watching the wind-whipped waves on the beach under the cool light of a nearly full moon. I could fall in love with you, he told her, teasing her with a promise that would never be fulfilled. Her head carefully heard every word, ignoring the lack of response from her heart. The second date seemed fine. She had a good time, and she sensed that he did, too. His affection seemed genuine, and he hinted at sex in the future. But he never called back. Finally she called him. He said that he wanted to see her again but that he was very busy, and it was difficult to pick an exact time. He assured her he had not had a change of heart. He did want to see her, he just couldn't tell her when. Why do I always pick losers? She asked me. What's wrong with me? You don't pick losers, I told her. Here's a handsome and successful man who told you he was interested and available. Don't blame yourself. I didn't say so, but inwardly I knew she was right. She was picking losers, in this case an emotional loser. It turned out he could not leave the safety of his married lover. He chose to remain dependent and safe. Elizabeth became the victim of his fear and his lack of courage. Better now than later, I thought. Elizabeth was strong, she would recover. Elizabeth asked if we still had time to attempt a regression. She could sense something important was near the surface, and she was anxious to find it, so we proceeded. After she emerged in an ancient past life, I was not sure we had made the right decision. She saw a land of broad, rolling plains and flat-topped hills. A land of yak-like animals and small agile horses, of large rounded tents and nomadic wanderers. It was a land of passion, and it was a land of violence. Her husband was away with most of the other men, hunting or raiding. The enemy struck, flying in on waves of horses against the depleted defenders. Her husband's parents were killed first, hacked down by broad, razor-sharp swords. Her baby was killed next, gutted by a spear. A shudder convulsed her spirit. She wanted to die, too, but such was not her destiny. Captured by the young warriors because of her beauty, she became the property of the strongest of the invading horde. A few other young women were also spared. Let me die, she pleaded to her captor, but he would not allow it. You are mine now, he said simply. You will live in my tent, and you will be my wife. Except for her husband, whom she would never see again, all her loved ones were dead. She had no choice. She attempted to escape several times, only to be quickly caught. Her suicide attempts were similarly thwarted. She hardened herself, and her depression turned into a constant smoldering anger, devouring her capacity to love. Her spirit withered, and she merely existed, a hardened heart trapped in a living body. No jail could be as confining or as cruel. Let's go back in time, I suggested. Let's go back before your village was raided. I counted back from 3 to 1. What do you see? I asked. Her face was now serene and peaceful as she remembered the early years, growing up, laughing and playing with the man she would eventually marry. She loved this childhood friend dearly, and he returned this love to her. She was at peace. Do you recognize this man you married? Look into his eyes. No, I don't, she finally answered. Look at the others in your village. Do you recognize anyone? She looked carefully at her relatives and friends in that lifetime. Yes, yes, my mother is there. Elizabeth gasped happily. She is the mother of my husband. We are very Silus. When my own mother died, she took me in as a daughter. I recognize her. Do you recognize anyone else? I inquired. She lives in the largest tent, with the flags and white feathers, she answered, ignoring my question. Her face darkened. They killed her, too. She lamented, jumping back to the massacre. Who killed her? Where did they come from? From the east, from beyond the wall. This is where they have taken me. Do you know the name of their land? She pondered this question. No, it seems to be somewhere in Asia, in the northern part. Maybe the west of China. We have oriental features. It's okay, I responded. Let's move ahead in time within that lifetime. What happens to you? I was finally allowed to kill myself, after I had grown older and was not so attractive anymore, she answered, without much emotion. I think they grew tired of me, she added. She was floating now, having left her body. I asked her to review her life. What do you see? What were the lessons? What did you learn? Elizabeth was silent for a few moments. And then she answered, I learned many things. I learned of anger and the foolishness of holding on to anger. I could have worked with the younger children, with the old ones, with the sick ones, in the enemy's town. I could have taught them. I could have loved them. But I never allowed myself to love. I never allowed myself to let my anger dissipate. I never allowed myself to open my heart once again. And these children, at least, were innocent. They were souls entering into this world. They had nothing to do with the raid, with the deaths of my loved ones. And yet I blamed them, too. I carried the anger even to the new generations, and this is foolish. It could hurt them, but most of all it harmed me. I never permitted myself to love again. She paused. And I had much love to give. She paused again and then seemed to speak from an even higher source. Love is like a fluid, she began. It fills up crevice. It fills empty spaces of its own accord. It is people who stop it by erecting false barriers. And when love cannot fill our hearts and our minds, when we are disconnected from our souls, which consist of love, then we all go crazy. I considered her words. I knew that love was important, perhaps even the most important thing in the world. But it had never dawned on me that the absence of love could cause us to lose our minds. I remembered the famous monkey experiments of the psychologist, Dr. Harry Harlow, in which young monkeys deprived of touching, of nurturing, of love became completely asocial, physically ill, or even died. They could not survive intact without it. Loving is not an option. It is a necessity. I turned back to Elizabeth. Look ahead in time. How does what you learned then affect you now? And how can this learning, how can this remembering, help you in your current life to feel happier, more peaceful, more loving? I must learn to let go of anger, to not hold it in, to recognize its roots and let it go. I must feel free to love, to not hold back, and yet I still search. I haven't found someone to love completely, unconditionally. There always seems to be a problem. She fell silent for half a minute. Suddenly she was speaking with a voice much deeper and slower than usual. The room felt very cold. God is one, she began. She struggled for words. It is all one vibration, one energy. The only difference is the rate of vibration. So God and people and rocks have the same relationship as steam and water and ice. Everything, all that is made up of the one. Love breaks down the barriers and creates unity. That which creates barriers and creates separateness and differences is ignorance. You must teach them these things. That was the end of the message. Elizabeth was resting. I thought of Catherine's messages, which seemed so similar to Elizabeth's. Even the room felt cold when Catherine would relay these messages, much as the room felt cold with Elizabeth. I pondered her words. Healing is the act of bringing together, removing the barriers. Separation is what causes harm. Why is it so difficult for people to grasp this concept? Although I have conducted more than 1,000 individual past life regressions with my patients and many more in groups, I have had only a half dozen of these experiences myself. I have had some remembrances in vivid dreams and during a shiatsu, or acupressure, treatment. Some of these are described in my earlier books. When my wife, Carol, finished a course in hypnotherapy to add to her skills as a social worker, she conducted a few past life regression sessions with me as the patient. I wanted to experience this with someone whom I trusted and who was well trained. I had been practicing meditation for years, and I went under deeply and quickly. When the memories started to flood into my mind, they were primarily visual and quite vivid, like my dream images. I could see myself as a young man from a wealthy Jewish family in Alexandria, around the time of Christ. Our community, I somehow knew, helped to finance the huge golden doors of the Great Temple in Jerusalem. My studies included Greek and the philosophy of the ancient Greeks, especially the followers of Plato and Aristotle. I remembered one fragment of my life as that young man, when I attempted to augment my classical education by traveling among the clandestine desert communities in the southern deserts and caves of Palestine and the north of Egypt. Each community was a type of learning center, usually of mystical and esoteric knowledge. Some of these probably were SN villages. I traveled very simply, carrying only a little food and some clothes. Just about everything I needed was provided for me along the way. My family had money, and we were known to these peoples. The spiritual knowledge I was acquiring was exciting and accelerated, and I enjoyed the journey. For several weeks along the way from community to community, I was joined by a man about my age. He was taller than I and had intense brown eyes. We both wore robes and had clothes on our heads. He emanated peace, and as we studied together with the wise men of the villages, he soaked up the teachings much more quickly than I afterward. He would teach me as we camped together by desert fires. After a few weeks, we separated. I went to study at a small synagogue near the Great Pyramid, and he went to the west. Many of my patients, including Elizabeth and Pedro, have remembered lives in the area of ancient Palestine. Many have remembered Egypt. For me, as for them, the images seemed extremely vivid and quite real. Soulmate, this is a part of Zindagi Ki Roshni consultancy. It has been established for those who have lost someone and for those who are very sad in their life. About 100 PDF books and 20 short audio books of this topic will be sent to those who join it. This data will be sent to their email or WhatsApp. If you want to join this organization, then please send WhatsApp message to this number.